This week's webinar is Common Cause, and we have Ashley Smith, who is a 2011 grad, and she works with Truckers Against Trafficking, which is an organization that educates truckers and organizations about human trafficking. So take it away, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me. So as she said, my name is Ashley Smith. I'm here with Truckers Against Trafficking. Before I really hop in, share why I'm excited to present to my fellow alumni on this topic. So first off, in my day-to-day job, I work with energy companies, truckers, and the occasional bus driver. And you would be surprised how many times I actually end up on the phone with Kasner alum, which is always fun to kind of connect on our shared history, or even when I'm talking to truckers that either are in the agricultural fields or they're old ag teachers, that type of stuff. It's always interesting to see how far-reaching our college is and the industry, what other industries it also touches. So first reason why I'm excited to be here. And then the second is as we kind of grow up and as we kind of go beyond our college days, we're each in this space where we are creating families and kind of settling into communities. And through social media, we're seeing a lot of hype or fear mongering about human trafficking. And I think that it's really important to have a very specific understanding of this crime and what it really looks like. So today we're going to talk about human trafficking, what it is and what it isn't. We're going to talk about myths. I'll talk about what Truckers Against Trafficking does specifically, and then I'll kind of give some tips at the end for parents or adults that have kids in their life that you care about, some actionable tips for you. So we always like to leave that with the parents so that you have something, so that if you're scared, there's something that you can do to protect your family and your community. So we're going to go ahead and get right in there. Some of this stuff is really hard to hear, but I'll try to share it in a factual information so that you can feel prepared and know what to look for. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings through force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of either commercial sex, that is prostitution, that's pornography, that's brothels, massage parlors. It can also be forced labor or labor trafficking. This can be construction work, domestic labor, nail salons, and agricultural fields. So this is where a third party is actually making a profit off of the labor of somebody else. Is human trafficking, and it is actually a form of modern day slavery. Now, when we talk about force, fraud, and coercion, what does that mean? Force, that's exactly what it sounds like. That's being beat, that's being forced to do things that you don't want to do, being held against your will. It can lead to death or being raped, things of that nature, being forced into drug addiction. That is a common tactic that traffickers use. Now, the next one is fraud. That's when you're promised one thing but delivered another. That could be a dream job in a great location. It could be work as a model or work as a singer, or it could even be the promise of legal documentation. But instead of receiving those things, the victims are trapped in a life of either forced prostitution or forced labor. Now, without a doubt, coercion is the most powerful means that traffickers use to keep their victims compliant and under their control. There are threats to safety, threats to their lives, and threats to their family members. We'll hear stories about mothers that are being forced into prostitution and their trafficker showing them videos of their kids and saying that if you don't do this, we are going to hurt your children. There's also a psychological coercion where the victim thinks that their trafficker is either a boyfriend or a father figure, and they are using that relationship against them. So they're stuck in a very psychological controlling position. Now, it is important to note that according to the federal definition of human trafficking, force, fraud, and coercion only have to be proven in adult human trafficking cases. Anyone under the age of 18 that is selling commercial sex is automatically a victim of human trafficking and needs services. That child cannot consent to selling themselves, so they need help to make that decision and to get out of that situation. Now, oftentimes in the news, we'll hear smuggling and trafficking used interchangeably when they're actually two separate crimes. Now, smuggling is actually a crime against the border, whereas trafficking is a crime against a person. For example, I could pay somebody $3,000 to smuggle me into another country, and in doing so, I am committing a crime against that country and that border. But if I get to my final destination and the person I've paid turns to me and says, that money was not enough, and now you must work for me for X amount of years, I have now become a victim of human trafficking. That crime is being committed against me. Now, not all victims of trafficking are smuggled, and not all people that are smuggled into a country become trafficked, but there is some overlap, especially when you think about people that are going into a country illegally. If they need help, they're not going to call law enforcement. They don't know where to go for help, and they don't really know the laws of if they can be forced to do work. So there is some overlap in that regard. And then there are two different types of trafficking that we specifically talk about. Sex trafficking is when they're forced into prostitution and things of that nature, and then labor trafficking. So that's people that are being forced to do work and not being paid a fair wage, not being paid for overtime, or being held against their will to do that work. As an organization, we do focus more on sex trafficking, but we do have resources for truck drivers and energy employees that might be able to keep an eye out for labor trafficking as they are doing their everyday jobs. So now I'm going to go into kind of dispelling a couple myths about, in general, that'll help to illuminate what our organization does. So the first myth is that we live in a slavery-free world, whereas the scope of trafficking tells us a different story. So there are over 40 million victims of human trafficking globally. That means that there are more people enslaved today than there were during the 400 years of transatlantic slave trade. Why is that? It's because human trafficking is a $150 billion criminal enterprise. It is the second largest criminal enterprise. It is actually higher than arms trafficking, and it is second only to drug. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has had reports of sex and labor trafficking in all 50 states, including Washington, D.C. This is happening in big cities, and it's happening in small towns all across the country, and it's most likely happening in your communities. Unfortunately, thousands of children are at risk of being prostituted in the United States every year. Children are the most vulnerable among us, especially those who are homeless or come from abusive homes. Unfortunately, victims of human trafficking are disproportionately women and children of color. So that is when we're talking about social justice and caring about our neighbors, understanding that different people are targeted is something that we need to understand so that we can protect all of our communities. And then the most staggering scope of this crime is that a victim may be forced to have sex up to 20 times a day. We all know somebody that has been through some sort of sexual trauma, and we know what that did to them. Maybe it was just one instance. Think about what it would mean for somebody you love to have to go through that time and time and time again every day, and that is just a fraction of what potential victims are going through. So understanding that it's a very large problem that people go through. Now, the second, everybody thinks that traffickers look like TV pimps. They think that they're going to be able to see them in the mall or see them at Target and know who they are. But unfortunately, traffickers, They have no gender, they have no specific race, they have no specific age. It can be anybody. You'll see on the screen a couple of different news stories. We have a firefighter, we've got a veteran, we've got a deputy consul general from India who was trafficking her domestic help. We've got a teacher. You can see that there is no one specific type of person that is a trafficker. And why is this? We say that it is the perfect storm, that the culture that we live in, people think that pimps aren't real. They just think that it's a word to use, or it's just something that happens in video games. But really, this is something that is happening in our world, and it's something that is ingrained in our culture. So understanding that what we're seeing, ever since I took this job, I got very sensitive to the word pimp and understanding kind of where that comes from, and that it's a real thing that people are having to deal with. The third myth, we all like to think it doesn't happen in my hometown. Yeah, it happens in those big cities, but it doesn't happen here. Yesterday, I did a quick search to kind of check out some areas that y'all might be familiar with. The top story is from Lubbock. The second story is from Amarillo. The third one is from Fort Worth. And then the one at the bottom is from Houston, which is where you'd think it would come from. But you name it, each community has been touched by this crime, whether it's happening there or it's happening to children or young people from that area. So understanding that each community is impacted by this crime. Now, I do want to bring this back to what my organization does specifically. You may have heard of these two. This is Laura Sorensen and Aldair Hadza. They were arrested in January of 2015. So I want to share this story with you. Cops were called to the scene at 3:20 p.m. These two were in an RV in a truck stop parking lot towards the back. So the cops go to the RV, they knock on the door, and they open. And they're like, oh, we're in the area on vacation, and we're visiting Sorensen's 8-year-old daughter. They're very friendly with the cops. They allow them to come into the camper, and once inside, the cops notice a third person, a young woman who wouldn't really look at the cops. She appeared malnourished. She seemed a little scared, but she was heavily made up, and her hair was kind of pulled up in a top knot. So she wouldn't talk to them. So the cops keep talking to these two. As they're there, they're sharing what they're doing in the area. And at one point, they point out of the RV window to a local landmark. And the cops all look with them, except for one of them. One of them keeps their eye on the third person. In that split second, she makes a silent plea for help. That officer takes her outside, and once out of sight and out of earshot of these two, she breaks down crying. She said that she's being held against her will, and that she's being abused both physically and sexually, and by these two. The story goes on, and she says that she doesn't know the last time she has had anything to eat or drink, stating that several days had passed. She was being forced to call home and tell her family that everything's okay and that she's here by her own free will. In fact, these two had injured or killed a dog in front of her and said that if she told anybody, they would do the same thing to her family. At one point in time, she tried to run away, but when they caught her, they injured the bottoms of her feet so that it would be too painful for her to try again. That same day in that truck stop parking lot, she was forced to perform oral sex to Hadza and some unknown man that they had found on Craigslist. They took her to the hospital, and a doctor later said that had the call not been made that day, that young woman would have been dead within a few days because of the malnutrition and torture that she had suffered at the hands of these two. And unfortunately, that is what trafficking looks like in our country today. As hard as that story is to hear, there is our organization recognize that truck drivers, they're the eyes and ears of our nation's highways. And driving those big rigs, they are trained to be vigilant and observant, and they may actually see victims, whether it's at those truck stops, whether it's on city streets or at rest areas, hotels and motels, bus stations, even at local businesses. They may see this and they may be able to report it. So that is why we started Truckers Against Trafficking. It was started to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking, bus, and energy industries to combat human trafficking as a part of their everyday jobs. Now, to achieve this mission, we have 3 goals. The first of which is to saturate the trucking and related industries with our TAP materials. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, trucking we get, but how did you get into these other spaces? So we did start working with truckers specifically because we knew that they could recognize and report this crime. And as we gained followers and we gained people that were using our resources, we had states that were requiring our training to be implemented for all CDL holders. So then we had bus drivers that were like, we have CDLs and we have to take this training, and it's good training, but we see this a little bit differently. So we created a new training program called Busing on the Lookout, with that specific thought that bus drivers can see this crime. Buses are used to transport victims, and they can also be potential reporters. So we created Bottle, Busing on the Lookout. And then about that same time, we had oil and gas companies saying, hey, we hire truckers. How can we make sure that they are taking this training? So we started working in that space. And as we did that, we got more and more requests from companies to actually present to their energy company employees about this. So we created a third training resource called the Empower Freedom Training, which can be used across all energy sectors on how they may see this crime and how valuable they are in reporting it. And that all goes to our resources. So every single one of our resources starts with a training video. They're about 25 to 26 minutes. They're free, so a company can use it no matter how many people they have or any of that stuff. There's no cost barrier. So there's a training DVD, there's wallet cards, there's posters, and the wallet cards are really, really helpful. So this is the outside of it. The front has the National Human Trafficking Hotline that anybody, whether they're an industry member or a community member, can call to report what they think might be human trafficking. So that hotline is 1-888 3737888, and it's anonymous, it's confidential, they're open 24/7. If you think that you see the crime happening, you can call 911 or the hotline. And we do warn everybody that don't approach traffickers. If you think that you see a situation, call law enforcement because they are trained to handle that situation. And then the hotline can also get services to that potential victim. The inside of the card is a resource that is useful across the board. First, it has that definition of human trafficking. So what is it? Where might it happen? Things of that nature. And then on the bottom left, it has actionable intel that law enforcement needs to open a case. So descriptions of cars or trucks, what people look like, what color their hair is, their height, pictures of license plates, what time of day did it happen. All of this stuff is what law enforcement needs to actually open a case and act on a tip. And timely information is extremely important. We have truckers that'll say, I saw this a couple days ago. And while that's helpful for law enforcement to keep an eye on a specific location, if the call is made right when it's seen, it's something that they can react to and possibly get somebody out of a bad situation or arrest traffickers. Now, the right-hand side has 2 distinct sections. First, it's questions to ask. So if you think that you are talking to a potential victim, maybe in a convenience store or something of that nature, asking, do they get to keep their money? If not, that means somebody else might be taking it from them. Does their family know where they are? Because if they don't, that they could be a runaway. They could be in a bad position. And then the big thing is the red flags to look for. So the two biggest red flags is, one, anybody under the age of 18, they're automatically considered a victim of human trafficking. So call the hotline if they look to be young. And then any evidence of pimp control. So if you see a car dropping off multiple women or girls, this could be at a hotel, this could be a casino, a truck stop, and then they come back and take them back, those are key signs that a trafficker may be forcing somebody to do something. Another one of our resources is what we call our window decals. So they go right inside of a truck driver's window. We have people put them on their regular trucks too, but it has the hotline and ask if they need help. And it sounds simple, but it truly makes an impact. So the gentleman on the screen, this is Adrian, and a couple years back, he went to a business at 3:00 in the morning to drop off a trailer, drop off a load, and he's filling out his paperwork. It's January, he's in a bigger city, it's cold, and he gets a knock on his window. And he looks out, and he sees a young woman, he rolls down the window, and she asks him if he can help her. And he's like, what's going on? She's like, my friend's boyfriend brought me here, and he told me that I had to sell myself to make money for him. And she said no. She said that wasn't the type of person she was. That's not what she was going to do. And he kicked her out of the car and he left. Now, she had no idea where he went, if he was coming back. She didn't have her phone. She didn't have money. She didn't have a jacket. And she needed help. So she knocked on his door, and he had this sticker in his window. So he calls the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they talk with the young woman, and they get a place for her to stay that night. She was actually a couple states away from home. And then they get her a chauffeur transport from the truck to the place that she was going to stay, and then a ride home the next day. So he had that decal. He called them. He let her stay in his truck, gave her water, got her warm, and then made sure that she made it safely. And he gave her number to her and said, if you need anything else, you call me. He truly believes that the reason that she knocked on his door and not the trucks that were 3 feet to either side of him was because of that decal. And that is the power that a decal can have. And all of our stuff is free. We send them across the country because we know that having that resource handy, not just for him to remember, but for potential victims to see, is so, so powerful. Now, on the flip side, our second goal is we partner with law enforcement and government agencies to facilitate the investigation of human trafficking. That first comes from tips, calls and tips, getting there's more truck drivers on the road than law enforcement. So if the truck drivers are kind of that second eyes and ears for law enforcement, it's so powerful. We provide training to law enforcement on how to handle these situations, how to work with victims to make them feel safe. And then we also help them with scouting and intel. So we'll have trucking companies partner with local law enforcement to actually do undercover operations and stings. So, and then we do regional events, which are coalition builds, where we bring together those key industry stakeholders with law enforcement and government agencies so they can all have those conversations and see how they can approach this issue as on a regional basis. And then we also have what we call our Iowa Motor Vehicle Enforcement Model, which is a list of 7 different things that state patrol can do to partner with our organization to fight this crime. So whether that's providing training or handing out resources or working with their CDL schools, we work with them to give them those resources to promote this training so that all of their truck drivers can be trained. So our last goal is to the resources of our partners to combat this crime. So whether that's training their employees, connecting us with other key stakeholders, or just spreading the word. We're continually impressed by the companies that we get to work alongside to truly combat human trafficking. So, and we know that it's working because to date, over 2,600 calls have been made into the National Human Trafficking Hotline from truck drivers alone. And that has generated almost 700 cases and over 1,200 victims. And this is only one slice of the data. This doesn't include calls that are made to local sheriff's office or 911 because we don't have access to those records. To date, we've trained 933,000 industry members, and that number goes up every day, and we're trucking our way to 1 million. We're hoping to hit that by the end of this year, early next year. So we know that our resources are working, and they're making their way into the hands of companies and industry members across the country. And that's because we know that it works. And these people are examples of our training in action. So the first picture are two people that worked at a Travel Centers of America, and they saw something, and one guy told his boss, and then they called the hotline, and that call broke open a trafficking ring. And then the second guy, we just told his story. He helped prevent somebody from being stuck in a life of prostitution just from making that call. The next one, we've got a bus driver and his dispatcher. There was a victim with her trafficker on the bus, and his call into dispatch brought law enforcement to them so that they could separate them from the victim from their trafficker. So very much a team effort in that regard. And then the last one, that's Kevin Kimmel. He used to drive for Conway. Now he drives for CFI. He is actually the one that called law enforcement in that story earlier. His call is what brought law enforcement to away from that situation. And he says that all he did was make a call. And that's all it takes. It takes you taking a second look and understanding that something didn't look right to him. So he was filling out his paperwork and he saw the RV and it seemed off. But then he saw like a young woman's face that was peeking out. And as he looked at her, somebody yanked her back out away from the window, and the curtain was closed. And just him thinking that's not right. That doesn't seem like a normal family situation. That doesn't seem like something that should be happening. His call is what brought law enforcement and got her the help that she needed. So everybody on this screen, they are winners of one of our awards of people that actually make that call. It's our Harriet Tubman Award, and they received it just because they saw something. They made that call and they got somebody out of a bad situation. And that's why we do the work that we do. So right now, I've kind of given you that overview of what our organization does. And one of the benefits of the work that we do is we present this information to companies and organizations, but then the people that get that information have it to take back home to their families and their communities. So not only are they keeping their eyes and ears open during work, but they're also taking home this knowledge to their families and their communities. So that's what I'm going to go into now. And we talk about what you're seeing on the internet about trafficking versus how it really happens. So you'll see on news stories on the left, these are the types of pictures that they'll show, and you'll have a certain level of fear mongering about trafficking. Whereas on the right, this is what it really looks like. It's happening online. Children are being groomed through social media. Teenagers that might be not have enough confidence, or they're bored, or traffickers will see that and they will use that as an opportunity to lure your children into a bad situation. So the unfortunate reality is that targeting your children's vulnerabilities is a full-time job for online predators, especially during now when we're spending a lot more time online and kids are spending more time online. This is where it's happening. It's less about a kid being taken from the grocery store or being picked up or kidnapped. It's more that those kids are being groomed online. So what can you do? Like, it's scary to hear, but I'm all about action and about sharing what you can actually do to help your kids. So the first one is, what can you teach your younger children? Age appropriate information is key. So the first thing is talking to them if they're online. What is appropriate content? What should they be looking at? What shouldn't they be looking at? And then if something comes up that makes them confused or sad or afraid or angry, what do they do? Do they show you? Is there that relationship where they feel okay showing you? And then having those conversations of who are their safe and trusted adults. So if they see something that is not right, or if they don't know how to handle it, who are those adults that they go to? And additionally, what roles do they play? Like the teacher-student relationship, completely normal, safe relationship. But what happens if a line is blurred? How do your kids react to that? How does that look? And how do you approach that? And you know your kids, you know when the right time to have those conversations is. And later on, I'll refer you some resources that will help if you're not sure how to handle those certain situations. So next thing that is kind of understanding those social media do's and don'ts. So that's going to be clearly disable any location services. You don't want a potential trafficker to know how to find your kid or know where they go to school. The next is kind of changing all of those public accounts to private in settings and checking to make sure that they are staying private. Researching apps, so understanding what they do, how they work. I know that recently I learned about that TikTok, how their algorithms work. If you're seeing things that make you uncomfortable and that kind of stuff, something triggered the algorithm to make that happen, and you have to change it so that those things don't pop up on your kids' TikTok. The next one, this is more so for older kids, is looking for those hidden accounts, those fake Instagrams, those places where they may be saying and doing things that you don't approve of. And then utilizing those parental controls. My favorite one is Bark, just because everything that I've read about them and I've heard from them is they are combating not just trafficking, but they're bullying, mental health. They have just this overwhelming wealth of information that their algorithms look at and notice things before parents do. So being proactive in those spaces so that you can protect them is worth its weight in gold, I believe. So the next thing is your older kids. So what conversations do you have? How does that look? Understanding stranger danger behavior online. So if a kid thinks that they're talking to somebody from their school, do they really know that they're from the same school? And knowing not to provide that personal information. So not sharing what school they go to, not sharing their personal address or where they spend a lot of time at, and other identifying information. A phone number may not seem like a big deal, but a lot can be tracked through that. So just knowing what those things are and what they shouldn't be sharing with people online, and then avoiding just friend requests, whether that's on Snapchat or other social media, if they don't know the person, and then not complaining online. This is going to sound weird because we've all kind of been in that boat. If you've looked at your old Facebook statuses recently, we all did this, where if you're bored or if you're looking for somebody to call you or to hang out with, those are vulnerabilities that traffickers can track and see. And if anything's public, they can kind of prey on those vulnerabilities. So understanding that if there's a self-esteem issue, or if they're bored, or if they're angry at their family or their friends, those are things that traffickers are going to see, and they're going to kind of start a relationship on that, saying, oh, your parents don't get you, or you're really pretty. I don't know why you say you're not pretty. And they're going to build that relationship and prey on those vulnerabilities. So having those conversations and seeing what people are commenting about that, even us our age, we all get those weird people that try to connect with us on Instagram or other social media that they're just creepers, but they are fishing for potential victims. So I do want to kind of forward y'all to two of my favorite people to send for resources if you're a parent and you want more. So a lot of this information was from the Crime Stoppers of Houston. They have a great cyber safety resource guide. And then I've co-presented with Street Grace, and they have an assortment of materials. First, they have an app safety guide, they have social media safety tips, and then they have tips on how to talk to kids about sex trafficking. So kind of starting with hypothetical questions and things of that nature, and then how to protect youth from that. So they are my favorite people to just say that they've got those resources. So there's a whole group of nonprofits that we each do different things, and we work with industry, and these people, they have great resources that if you're not sure, if you want to know how to have those conversations, they can help you. And their resources are free, they're on their website, and they're a great place to start to have those conversations. So what next? This was a lot of information. The first thing is if you recognize human trafficking happening, call the human trafficking hotline. If you're not sure, they will ask you leading questions. They'll let you know if they think that you're seeing as human trafficking or not. They are a great resource. The next is share that training. If anybody in your network is a truck driver, if they work in the energy industry, school bus drivers, city bus drivers, all of our resources are free. And I'd love to be connected with them to make sure that they have them so that they can be a part of the solution as well. The next is understanding demand. We didn't get a lot into this. We have some resources on our website that really talk about if people weren't buying commercial sex, there would be no need for victims. So understanding that that is part of our if your company or your organization, if there's any way we can work together to kind of combat this crime, I'm open to that. And then the biggest thing is spreading the word, whether it's taking it home to your family to spread awareness about it or telling other people in your personal sphere of influence. This is how we work. We're grassroots. We work with other groups and other companies to really get this message out there. So this is my contact information. If we happen to go to college together, my number is still the same. So feel free to give me a call, or this is my work email address, or we can connect on LinkedIn. So I am here to be a resource if you have questions, or if you're not sure about how to handle something, or if your company wants to work together. That is what I am here for. So feel free to screenshot this or take a picture on your phone and